Let me ask you something. When was the last time you canceled plans and genuinely felt relief? Not guilt, not that low-level anxiety of, I should be out there doing something. Just relief, like your whole body exhaled. If that hit a little too close, keep watching, because I want to talk about something that doesn't get examined honestly enough. What it actually means about you when being home isn't just comfortable, it's where you function best. And I don't mean that in a, you're an introvert, here's your label kind of way. I mean something deeper than that. Because here's the thing, society has a pretty clear story about people who prefer staying in. It goes something like shy, unmotivated, maybe a little avoidant, maybe scared of the world. And I think that story is almost completely wrong. Or at least it's lazy. So let's actually look at what's going on. The first thing I noticed, and this took me a while to name, is that people who genuinely prefer being home tend to have a really unusual relationship with their own mental space. Like, they're aware of it, they track it, not consciously necessarily, but they notice when it gets cluttered. They notice when too many conversations, or too many environments, or too many inputs start stacking up. And they need to go somewhere quiet, not because they're fragile, but because they're actually paying attention to themselves. Most people don't do that. Most people are running so hot that they only find out they're overwhelmed when they crash. But if you're someone who craves home, you tend to catch it earlier. You feel the friction before it becomes a breakdown. That's not weakness. That's a kind of self-monitoring that's honestly pretty hard to build if you don't already have it. Now, and I want to be careful here, that same quality can absolutely become avoidance. I'm not going to pretend it can't. There's a version of this where I need quiet time becomes a way of never having to do the uncomfortable things. And I think anyone who's honest with themselves has probably been there at some point. I know I have. The question is whether you're recharging or just hiding, and only you can really answer that. But assuming it's the former, that awareness, that sensitivity to your own internal state, that's actually the foundation of a lot of high-functioning people's success. They just don't always advertise where it comes from. The second thing, and this one surprised me when I started thinking about it, is that home-preferring people tend to be deep processors. Like, not just I like to think before I speak, I mean, they genuinely need time with information before they know what they think about it. A conversation ends and they're still in it 2 hours later. An idea gets introduced and they're turning it over for days. That can look like overthinking from the outside, and sometimes it is. But a lot of the time, what's actually happening is that these people are doing something most people never do. They're waiting to find out what they actually think, rather than just reacting to whatever's in front of them. There's a real cost to that, by the way. In a world that runs on fast takes and immediate responses, going home to think instead of just having your opinion in the moment can make you look uncertain or slow. People who process deeply sometimes get mistaken for people who don't have anything to say, and that's genuinely frustrating, because usually the opposite is true. But that depth, that need to sit with things, it doesn't happen in noise. It doesn't happen at parties. It doesn't happen in constant movement. It happens in the kind of stillness that you can only really find when you're somewhere you feel safe enough to go quiet. Here's one that might sting a little. People who prefer staying home often have pretty high standards, not just for their work or their interests, but for their company, for the kinds of conversations they want to be in, for the way time gets spent. And the world can read that as antisocial or picky, or like you think you're better than everyone else. But that's usually not what it is. It's more that when you actually enjoy your own company, when being alone doesn't feel like a punishment, the threshold for what makes social time worth it goes up. You're not going out to avoid being alone. So when you do go out, it has to mean something. It has to be real. That's a high bar. And it means a lot of surface level socializing just doesn't do it for you. Small talk feels like a tax. You'll pay it when you have to, but you're not going to seek it out. And because you know what a genuinely good conversation feels like, the average one can feel almost worse than nothing. I'm not saying that's perfect. It can make connection harder. It can mean you have fewer friends than someone who's easier to please. But the friendships you do have, I'd bet they're real. I'd bet they're the kind where you can pick up mid-sentence after months apart. That's not nothing. That's actually rare. There's also something about the way homebodies relate to creative or intellectual work. I've noticed, and this is a pattern more than a rule, that people who are drawn to home tend to have something they go deep on. A thing, a project, a skill, a subject, a craft, something they return to. Not because they have to, but because something in them just needs to build, or understand, or make. And that kind of work, the sustained, focused, obsessive kind, it doesn't coexist well with constant social momentum. You can't be in flow for 3 hours and also be available. You can't really develop expertise in anything while you're always somewhere else. The people who produce interesting things, who actually get good at things, tend to protect their time at home. Not because they're selfish, because they understand that depth requires conditions. Now, I want to say this carefully. Staying home a lot doesn't automatically mean you're doing meaningful work. You can also just be watching 6 hours of television and calling it recharging. That's valid sometimes, but it's not the same thing. The trait I'm actually pointing at is a pull towards something, a restlessness to create or understand that social life sometimes interrupts. The last one is maybe the hardest to articulate, and I think it might be the most important. People who are comfortable at home, really comfortable, not just avoiding, tend to have a more stable sense of themselves that doesn't depend on being seen. Like, they don't need the external feedback loop as much. They're not going out to remind themselves they exist, or to feel interesting, or to be witnessed. They already have an inner life that feels real to them. That sounds great, and in a lot of ways it is. But it can also mean that when something is going wrong internally, when there's real pain or real loneliness, it's easier to miss, because you're already used to being alone, because quiet already feels normal. And so the difference between healthy solitude and isolation can get blurry in a way that it might not for someone who's more externally oriented. I think that's worth sitting with. Not to catastrophize it, just if you're someone who's very comfortable alone, it's worth occasionally asking yourself, is this contentment or is this something else wearing contentment's face? Those can look identical from the inside. Here's where I want to land. Because I'm not trying to make this into a being a homebody is actually amazing, society just doesn't understand us kind of video. That's too easy and too self-congratulatory, and honestly, I'd find it annoying if I were watching it. What I actually think is this: the traits that make someone prefer staying home, the self-awareness, the depth, the high bar for connection, the capacity for focused work, the internal stability, those are real. They're not made up, they're not cope, and they've been consistently undervalued by a culture that treats busyness and social output as the primary markers of a life being lived well. But they also come with real costs, real risks, real versions of themselves that go wrong. And the people who actually use these traits well are the ones who are honest about both sides, who protect their solitude without hiding in it, who know the difference between choosing quiet and fearing noise, who can be alone without disappearing. That balance, that's actually hard. And if you're working on it, that's not a character flaw. That's just the particular work you have to do. He probably already knew that, which is maybe why you stayed home to watch this.